Nature has a pretty solid track record of building predators that make sense. Wolves have endurance and pack coordination. Great white sharks have electroreception and rows of self-replacing teeth. Even the T-Rex, for all its famous tiny arms, had a skull so reinforced it could bite through bone like it was cardboard. The point is, most apex predators feel like something that was designed with a clear goal in mind. And then there's the Carnotaurus. The Carnotaurus is what happens when evolution apparently decided that being terrifying wasn't enough and started adding features just to see what would happen. Two horns above the eyes for no fully agreed upon reason, arms so comically small they made the T-Rex look like a weightlifter, and a running capability that by some estimates would have made it one of the fastest large predators to ever walk the earth. It is, by any reasonable metric, one of the most bizarre and fascinating dinosaurs ever discovered, and somehow, despite all of its apparent design flaws, it was an exceptionally successful killer. Let's start from the beginning. The Carnotaurus, whose name translates to meat-eating bull, which honestly undersells it, lived during the late Cretaceous period, approximately 72 to 69 million years ago, in what is now Patagonia, Argentina. It belonged to a group of theropod dinosaurs known as abelisaurids, a family of predators that were the dominant large carnivores of the southern continents, while the T-Rex and its relatives were busy ruling the north. Think of abelisaurids as the southern hemisphere's answer to tyrannosaurs, except evolution took them in a wildly different direction. What makes the Carnotaurus particularly special from a scientific standpoint is that it is known from an exceptionally complete skeleton, including, remarkably, impressions of its skin. This is extraordinarily rare in the fossil record and has given paleontologists a level of detail about this animal that most dinosaurs simply don't have. The skin impressions revealed a mosaic of small, non-overlapping scales with occasional larger bumps distributed across the body. No feathers, no frills, just scales, which, given everything else going on with this animal, feels almost disappointingly normal. The single known skeleton was discovered in 1984 by Argentine paleontologist José Bonaparte, and it remains to this day the most complete abelisaurid ever found. For a dinosaur that looked this ridiculous, it at least had the decency to leave behind good evidence. The most immediately striking feature of the Carnotaurus, and the reason it became the face of the abelisaurid family, are the two thick, blunt horns projecting outward and slightly upward from above its eyes. No other theropod dinosaur had anything quite like them, which immediately raises the obvious question: what were they for? The honest answer is that paleontologists still don't fully agree, which is either refreshing or frustrating, depending on your tolerance for ambiguity. The leading theories fall into two camps. The first is intraspecific combat, meaning the horns were used to headbutt or push against other members of the same species, likely during competition for mates or territory, similar to how modern bovines use their horns. The structure of the horns supports this somewhat, being thick and robust enough to handle significant impact forces without shattering. The second theory is that the horns were primarily visual display structures, essentially status symbols that communicated dominance, health, or reproductive fitness to other Carnotaurus individuals, without necessarily requiring physical contact. In this reading, bigger horns meant higher status, and fighting was a last resort. What the horns almost certainly were not is hunting weapons. The geometry doesn't work. A bipedal predator striking prey with its forehead would require an extremely specific and awkward attack angle, and the prey animals available to the Carnotaurus, primarily mid to large sauropods and ornithopods, were not the kind of animals you wanted to headbutt. For hunting, the Carnotaurus had other tools, which we'll get to shortly. The one thing everyone agrees on is that the horns made the Carnotaurus look genuinely intimidating. Combined with a short, deep skull and forward-facing eyes, this was an animal that looked like it had a problem with you personally. If the horns are the Carnotaurus's most distinctive feature, the arms are its most infamous. And to be fair, calling them arms is being generous. They were more like vestigial afterthoughts attached to an otherwise formidable body. The forelimbs of the Carnotaurus were extraordinarily reduced, even by theropod standards. The upper arm bone was present but massively shortened, and the lower arm bones were so reduced that they barely functioned as a proper forearm at all. The hands had 4 fingers, but they pointed sideways and had almost no range of motion. To give you a sense of scale, in an animal that measured roughly 8 to 9 meters or 26 to 30 feet in length and weighed somewhere between 1.3 and 2.1 metric tons, the entire forelimb was about the length of a human arm. On a 2-ton apex predator, just hanging there. The T-Rex, often mocked for its small arms, at least had forelimbs with functioning musculature that could exert several hundred pounds of force, and may have been used to help the animal rise from a resting position. The Carnotaurus arms appear to have been almost entirely useless for any practical purpose. They couldn't reach the mouth. They couldn't grip prey. They were too small to provide balance and too weak to matter in a fight. This is one of those cases where evolution seemingly went all in on one set of adaptations, the legs, the neck, the jaws, and simply stopped caring about anything else. Which brings us to where the Carnotaurus truly earned its reputation. Here is where the Carnotaurus stops being a punchline and starts being genuinely alarming. Biomechanical studies on the skeleton have revealed that the Carnotaurus had an unusually developed tail musculature, specifically a set of muscles called the caudofemoralis that connected the tail to the upper leg bones and acted as the primary engine for locomotion. In the Carnotaurus, these muscles were exceptionally large, suggesting a level of leg-driving power that was well above average for a theropod of its size. Combined with long, slender lower leg bones that are generally associated with fast-running animals, the picture that emerges is of a large predator optimized for speed in a way that few animals its size ever achieved. Estimates vary depending on the model used, but several studies have suggested top speeds of between 48 and 56 kilometers per hour, or roughly 30 to 35 miles per hour. For context, a lion tops out at around 80 kilometers per hour, but a lion weighs 200 kilograms. The Carnotaurus weighed up to 10 times that. At that mass, running at 56 kilometers per hour is not just fast, it is extraordinary. The fastest human being to ever live, Usain Bolt, at his absolute peak, reached 44.7 kilometers per hour. Over a short sprint, the Carnotaurus may well have been faster. This speed almost certainly compensated for the relatively modest bite force estimates associated with the skull. Unlike tyrannosaurs, the Carnotaurus had a comparatively slender jaw that was probably not designed for crushing bone. Instead, it appears to have been built for a fast, repeated biting style using speed and neck musculature to deliver rapid, deep strikes rather than a single bone-shattering crunch. Think less like a T-Rex and more like a very large, very fast, and very angry shark on legs. The late Cretaceous of Patagonia, where the Carnotaurus lived, was a genuinely difficult place to be a prey animal. The landscape was a mix of floodplains, forests, and open terrain, populated by massive titanosaur sauropods, some of the largest animals to ever walk the earth, as well as various ornithopods and smaller animals. The Carnotaurus, while not the absolute largest predator in the fossil record of the region, was almost certainly the fastest and most agile large carnivore in its ecosystem. What makes this particularly interesting is the question of how a relatively slender-jawed predator tackled animals that frequently outweighed it by a factor of 10 or more. The current thinking is that the Carnotaurus likely targeted younger, smaller, or injured individuals rather than healthy adults of the largest species, a strategy seen in virtually every large predator alive today. The combination of speed to run prey down and a neck powerful enough to deliver rapid, disabling bites to vulnerable areas like the throat or flanks would have made it a highly effective hunter regardless of jaw strength. The Carnotaurus should not work. Horns with no clear offensive purpose, arms that a toddler could arm wrestle, a jaw that, compared to its relatives, seems almost politely understated. By every apparent metric, it looks like a committee of engineers who couldn't agree on a design brief and ended up with something deeply strange. And yet it survived for millions of years as an apex predator across a continent full of enormous animals. It left behind some of the best preserved skin impressions in the dinosaur fossil record. And it ran fast enough that, in a straight sprint, it would have caught most things alive today without breaking a sweat. Sometimes evolution doesn't build what makes sense. Sometimes it builds what works. In the case of the Carnotaurus, those turned out to be the same thing, just in the most unexpected way possible.